some positive leftist news with Mexi.
PLN Day, one and all, the most joyous of days. I'm your host, Mexi, here to delight and hopefully inspire you with all of the progress and wins being achieved by working people everywhere. I've been on maternity leave, and the experience of having a child in this world has only cemented my resolve to revolutionize society for future generations and the planet. And it's only strengthened my conviction that doomerism is counter-revolutionary. So while the corporate media may seem bleak, the drive and tenacity of activists everywhere should remind us that if we get out and stand together, we will win. Hundreds of Indigenous Sami reindeer herders and their allies, including Greta Thunberg and other environmental campaigners, staged a 9-day protest to tear down wind turbines that were built on reindeer pastures used by Sami herders without their consent. The protest culminated in a blockade of the main road to Norway's royal palace and of the entrances of several government ministries in Oslo. The activists, many of them teenagers, agreed to pause their blockade after the Norwegian Prime Minister met with the herders and acknowledged the ongoing human rights violations. Norway's Supreme Court ruled in October 2021 that the construction of the turbines had violated the rights of the Sami, who have used the land for reindeer for centuries, and the activists say that a transition to green energy should not come at the expense of the rights of Indigenous people. Norway's oil and energy minister apologized on behalf of the government for failing to act despite the Supreme Court ruling, and activists say they are primed to restart the blockade at any moment should action not be taken in good time. Decolonization and Indigenous land rights are key to both social justice and environmental sustainability, and it's fantastic to see Indigenous and non-Indigenous youth uniting in struggle and forcing change for land back and climate justice. The numbers are in. Please join us in a round of applause for the U.S. labor movement, which in 2022 saw a 52% increase in the number of work stoppages from the previous year, with 60% more workers participating in strikes. 272 work stoppages in 2021 grew to 424 in 2022. That number consists of 417 strikes and 7 lockouts. While around 140,000 workers took part in a work stoppage in 2021, 224,000 workers did the same last year. While the numbers aren't what they were in, say, the 30s or 60s, a 52% increase reflects an increasing awakening in the American working class. All power to the people in uniting, educating, agitating, and organizing. A decade after his death, Commander Hugo Chávez's legacy continues to live on in Venezuela and worldwide. This former president of Venezuela and champion of the Bolivarian Revolution passed away on the 5th of March 10 years ago. Through his social, political, and economic policies, Chávez transformed the nation, reducing the rate of hunger, poverty, and extreme poverty by more than 50%. Through his social housing program, 4 million homes were provided to low-income people, and education became far more accessible to all Venezuelans. On the anniversary of his death, thousands of Venezuelans came together in the capital, Caracas, to pay tribute to Chávez and demonstrate their commitment to continue his anti-imperialist and socialist legacy. They chanted, "Chávez didn't die, he multiplied. I am Chávez, and Chávez is alive." Yaritza Mota, a teacher, stated, "A day like today for us Venezuelans, for us teachers, is an unforgettable day because for us, Chávez is still alive. He is still present. We cannot forget that Venezuela was declared free of illiteracy thanks to the wonderful management of our unforgettable and eternal Commander Hugo Chávez Frías." But Chávez's legacy did not end in Venezuela, and hundreds of leftist leaders and intellectuals across the world also gathered in Caracas this month to take part in the international meeting on the importance of the Bolivarian thought of Hugo Chávez in the 21st century. The event encouraged reflection on his anti-imperialist and anti-capitalist legacy and the continued importance of this legacy today. Cuba Solidarity activist and co-executive director of the People's Forum, Manolo de los Santos, stated, "If we want to celebrate Chávez's legacy and say that we are Chavistas, we must raise a permanent campaign against imperialism. The planet faces its greatest dilemma. Either the planet survives or imperialism survives." As we move towards multipolarity and increasing anti-imperialist sentiment across the globe, it's fantastic to see the Bolivarian Revolution holding strong. On the 9th of March, the Michigan House passed bills that repealed the right to work laws for public and private sector employees. Right-to-work laws interfere with the ability of unions to collect dues from workers who enjoy union protections, and thus starve unions of funds, power, and bargaining capability. In short, they weaken unions and empower corporations. Cheers and applause broke out on the balcony of Michigan House after the news of the bill's repeal. Remember, one and all, the union makes us strong. Speaking of, in union news, a National Labor Relations Board judge has ordered Starbucks to reinstate illegally fired employees, reopen closed stores, halt union-busting tactics, and take other reparative measures after ruling the company engaged in egregious and widespread misconduct following the establishment of the chain's first unionized store in Buffalo, New York. Workers at Bandcamp have formed a union called Bandcamp United. They are affiliated with Tech Workers Union 1010, a part of the Office and Professional Employees International Union. This comes 1 year after Epic Games acquired Bandcamp in March of last year. The German trade union Verdi had its biggest increase in memberships in the last 2 months since its founding, with 45,000 new members. Thousands of German public healthcare workers who are part of Verdi flexed their collective power and went on a 2-day warning strike this month in cities across the country. Concerned about the fall in real wages over the past 3 years, they are demanding fair contracts, an increase in wages, and more staff and resources. Verdi has said that real wages have fallen in the country for the 3rd year in a row. Even though wages have gone up compared to the previous year, inflation will be more than double that in 2022, at nearly 8%. The 3rd round of negotiations started March 27th, and negotiations with doctors will resume from April 4th. Solidarity with German healthcare workers. Thousands of Indian farmers who held a long march in the state of Maharashtra were successful in forcing the government to accept all of their demands. The march went from March 12th to 18th and was led by All India Kisan Sabha, a left-wing farmers' organization. The farmers had a 17-point charter of demands, including remunerative crop prices, a complete loan waiver to the peasantry, the waiving of pending electricity bills, a 12-hour daily supply of power, and compensation by the government and insurance companies for the damage sustained by peasants due to unseasonal rains and other natural calamities. They had solidarity from civil society groups, students, and a number of prominent activists who brought them food and resources to sustain an extended protest. Congratulations to Indian farmers and their allies. Swedish software developer and cyber activist Ola Bini has been declared innocent by an Ecuadorian court, which is precedent-setting in the defense of the rights to digital privacy and security. Bini was initially charged with unauthorized access to the computer system of Ecuador's National Telecommunications Corporation in April 2019, and due to his association with Julian Assange, was accused of trying to destabilize the Moreno government. His acquittal came after years of tireless campaigning in defense of Bini and human rights online. According to Bini, this decision makes Ecuador a safer place for cybersecurity. Activists from across the state of Georgia and beyond descended on Atlanta this month for a week of action against so-called Cop City, an in-construction police training center that protesters argue will further militarize the police and is supporting the police narrative as opposed to finding alternatives to policing. The center's construction would also take over parts of the Ville-Marie forest, which the founder of community movement builders, Kamal Franklin, says is one of the most significant urban forests in the U.S., which borders a black working-class neighborhood in southeast Atlanta. The week of action included a multiplicity of educational, cultural, and protest activities, including a 2-day family-friendly all-day concert on public land and some less family-friendly torching of construction equipment. This was followed by a press conference, Muskogee women entering a meeting of the Atlanta Regional Council and serving an eviction notice to the mayor as the land's rightful stewards, and a nighttime rally and march. The week culminated on March 12th, when Tortuguita's ashes were scattered in the Ville-Marie forest by their mother, who said the Tortuguita spirit would always live in these woods. Activists are not backing down and have provided a list of activities we can all do to show support. Please visit stopcop.city/organize with us. In late February, demonstrators and members of the Montreal Autonomous Tenants Union rallied at Cabot Square to protest a planned eviction of the unhoused encampment under the Ville-Marie Expressway by Transport Québec. The tenant union advocates for tenants' rights and organizes residents into self-governing groups using direct action against landlords who have exacerbated the housing crisis. Thanks to their mobilization in November of 2022, the planned evictions were postponed. Now, the encampment residents, organized under the name Resilience Montreal, have scored a victory in their fight for housing justice. The Mobile Legal Aid Clinic took the Transport Department to court on behalf of the unhoused encampment residents, seeking an injunction to stop the government from evicting them. Quebec's Superior Court found this month that the government is responsible for finding housing for the residents, and the parties involved are now working towards that aim along with medical and other help suited to each person's needs. Mobile Legal Clinic Director Donald Tremblay said, "We're not talking about putting these people into shelters. We're talking about housing, and this is very significant." Incredible. Every tenant needs a union, solidarity with the activists and legal professionals fighting for housing rights for all. On March 18th, over 500,000 people took to the streets of Mexico City to commemorate the 85th anniversary of the nationalization of the oil industry in the country. The mobilization also expressed support for President Obrador's decision to nationalize the lithium industry. Speaking of former President Cardenas, who nationalized the oil industry, President AMLO stated, "The general strategy can be summed up in 3 important and consecutive actions. First, he handed over the land to the peasants and helped the workers. Then he promoted their organization. And finally, with that social base, he was able to carry out the expropriation of oil and other assets of the nation. Cheers to energy sovereignty in Mexico." Thousands of Sri Lankan workers exercised a general strike on March 15th, rejecting the sharp increase in income tax and electricity charges for working people. The increased taxes were being imposed in the country as a precondition for a bailout by the infamous IMF. The strike was called by over 40 trade unions and had the full support of workers in the public sector, including railways, hospitals, schools, and ports. Divakara Athugala, a Sri Lanka Insurance Corporation employee, said, "We've come out to the streets today to call for more competent solutions to the economic crisis in Sri Lanka that the state perpetuated. Selling state assets is not the solution." Workers are prepared to extend their strike indefinitely if their demands are not met. All power to the people staying united and refusing defeat. In late February, 10,000 Italians gathered in Genoa to join a mobilization organized by the Collective Autonomous Port Workers to demand safety and security for port workers, an increase in wages in the face of inflation, and an end to arms trafficking in the ports. Under the banner of "Lower the Weapons, Raise the Wages," the procession marched from the Canepa seafront to Piazza dei Ferrari. Arms have been sent through the ports to support imperialist wars such as the attack on Yemen. Dock workers and trade union allies are saying no more. And major props to the trade unions who greeted the far-right Giorgia Meloni attempting to speak at a trade union conference with a rousing round of Bella Ciao. On March 18th, the 20th anniversary of the invasion of Iraq, thousands of anti-war protesters gathered in front of the White House and demanded an end to the endless U.S. wars of the past 20 years and an end to their escalation of the war in Ukraine. The protest featured 8 coffins draped in the flags of several of the countries struck by the U.S. war machine, representing those needlessly killed in the past 2 decades of war and sanctions. The march then proceeded to the Washington Post, where protesters decried the corporate media's role in manufacturing consent for imperialist aggression, as Chomsky and Herman famously exposed. Answer Coalition's Brian Becker denounced this warmongering publication, saying, "We know who you are. You're not journalists. You're an echo chamber for the war machine, and you too are guilty for the deaths of all of these people." This sentiment was reinforced by the banner at the front of the march, reading, "Remember Iraq, no more wars based on lies." As imperialism is the highest stage of capitalism, the robust anti-imperialist and anti-war movement of the past decades needs reviving now more than ever. Thank you to the courageous activists standing up to the U.S. war machine. On March 10th, members of the National Union of Metalworkers of South Africa and the Socialist Revolutionary Workers' Party marched to the U.S. Embassy in Pretoria to demand freedom for revolutionary political prisoner Mumia Abu-Jamal. This action was part of a global month-long solidarity campaign for his release as he awaits news on whether he will be granted a new trial, as evidence shows that the prosecution bribed the witnesses and tried to exclude Black people from the jury. NUMSA members chanted, "All power to the people, all power to the working class." On International Working Women's Day, millions of women and gender-diverse people marched in Latin America and the Caribbean to protest patriarchy and patriarchal capitalism and demand equal rights for all. In Argentina, activists held a national strike demanding an end to gender discrimination and violence against women and the LGBTQ+ community. The Ni Una Menos collective also rejected the country's debt with the IMF, stating that its repayment is preventing the growth of women, gender-diverse people, and children due to the decrease in the state's social policies. They stressed that the country's historical economic debt is with women and gender-diverse people, not the IMF. The Venezuelan Popular Feminism Platform joined demonstrations in Venezuela and issued a statement denouncing U.S. imperialism and the imposition of puppet governments in the region, along with the ongoing illegal sanctions that harm all people in Venezuela, but especially women and gender-diverse people. They also called on the U.S. and its NATO allies to cease their aggression and proxy wars globally, and called for an end to the destruction of our planet by the global transnational capitalist class. From Argentina to Mexico, socialist feminists are uniting against patriarchal capitalism, imperialism, and neo-fascism. On International Working Women's Day, thousands of women across Pakistan took to the streets in Aurat marches across major cities to demand increased wages, job security, environmental rights, and an end to laws that target the marginalized and silence dissent. Additionally, Aurat called for action on issues such as the invisible exploitation of trans communities, the reproductive labor of women, and education. They chanted, "We want answers from the state, we want accountability over hunger." Numerous slogans also demanded the state say no to the International Monetary Fund's austerity and anti-poor measures, which only further imperialism. The Awami Workers' Party stated, "We reject the rhetoric of the liberal propertied classes who wage culture wars while refusing to name capitalist patriarchy as the real source of gender oppression. The brutal conditionalities of the IMF and our own ruling class have devastated the lives of working-class women across Pakistan." Aptly summarizing what the Aurat stands for, one organizer, Iman Zainab, said, "We speak of socialist feminism, we speak of democracy, we speak of anti-enforced disappearances, we speak of equality and access to public spaces for women. These are the reasons why the state will always have a problem with us." Thanks to activists, organizers, and lawmakers coming together in Michigan, the state's legislature voted to repeal the state's pre-Roe total ban on abortion. Congratulations to organizers fighting for reproductive freedom and bodily autonomy. In a landmark ruling, a South Korean court has recognized social benefits for same-sex couples. Under the National Health Service, same-sex couples will now receive the same rights as heterosexual couples. This decision rewrites a previous ruling, which occurred in January 2022, that rejected a gay couple's attempt to obtain shared health benefits. One of the partners, Song-wook, said, "After the first trial, despite the loss, I said that our love won, is winning, and will win. And today demonstrates more clearly that our love has won and is winning." Minnesota Governor Tim Walz has signed an executive order this month to make the state a refuge for trans people who flee their homes in order to seek life-saving gender-affirming care. The executive order compels state agencies to protect people seeking gender-affirming health care in Minnesota, as well as the entities that provide it. State agencies are also forbidden from providing information or assisting investigations to penalize trans people and their allies for seeking transition-related care. Judgments from other states that terminate parental rights because the parent provided their child with transition-related care will not be recognized by the state of Minnesota, and the state will also refuse to comply with subpoenas that seek information about trans people who travel to Minnesota to obtain care. This is absolutely beautiful news in the midst of the egregious attacks against trans people in many places in the U.S. Thank you to the activists who fought for this affirmation of trans rights. Canadian citizens convicted for antiquated, unjust, anti-LGBTQ+ and anti-abortion laws are now able to have their records expunged. This new legislation will be an expansion of the 2018 Expungement of Historically Unjust Convictions Act that previously voided convictions such as gross indecency or sodomy. Now the act will also include obsolete laws that criminalized abortion care and offenses prosecuted under laws related to the historical police raiding of bathhouses, LGBTQ+ bars, and nightclubs. Minister of Public Safety Marco Mendicino stated today's additions of abortion-related, bawdy house, and indecency-based offenses to the Expungement of Historically Unjust Convictions Acts represents yet another important and necessary step towards righting historical and systemic discrimination faced by many Canadians. A struggle for environmental justice is unfolding in Minneapolis' East Phillips neighborhood. Residents have long lived nearby toxic facilities affecting their health and causing premature death. The community made plans in 2014 to build a healthier future by converting the Roof Depot warehouse into a community hub and indoor farm called East Phillips Farm. However, the city seized the area for a truck yard project and plans to demolish the Roof Depot, which would stir up arsenic in the soil as the depot is sitting on a Superfund site. The neighborhood is highly diverse with 38 native tribal affiliations. Residents' plan for the site includes an indoor farm, green jobs, affordable housing, a bike shop, rooftop solar, and as a cooperatively owned site, it would produce fresh, affordable food, not pollution. Activists have been fighting for 9 years to prevent the city's plan to sell to private developers, And thanks to recent mobilizations, they have once again delayed the demolition that was scheduled for February 27th. Amazing news, but the fight rages on. Please follow East Phillips Farm and support their struggle for environmental and food justice. Comrades, if you have good news from the current month, please send your stories to totalliberationpodcast@gmail.com. Thank you to Javi for the positive news jams. Thank you to Cosmo for the positive news background. Thank you to myself and Catherine for script writing and production, and yours truly once more for hosting again. Thank you also to Tristan for editing this glorious video. A huge thanks to our patrons who make the show possible. To support, please go to patreon.com/positiveleftistnews, or you can give us a one-time tip via PayPal. The link is in the description box below.